Hi, everyone. My name is Becky Robinson. We're now broadcasting live on Zoom and also on Facebook today, and we're so excited that you've decided to join us for this very important topic of developing resilience, how to remain calm in the midst of workplace chaos. Rich, it's so great to have you.
Thanks, Becky. It's good to be here.
So as everyone is joining, I hope you'll take a quick moment to let us know where you're calling in from today. And we would invite you please to select all panelists and attendees so that everyone who's on the webinar today can be communicating with one another. If you only shared a panelist, only we will see it, and all of the others on the call will not hear your comments. So please take a quick moment, select all panelists and attendees, and let us know where you're calling in from. So welcome in Chattanooga, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, in Wisconsin, in California, in Toronto, South Dakota. Holy cow, these are coming in very fast and furiously. If you happen to be calling in with a group today at your organization and you have joined together for some workplace learning, we would love to know the name of your organization so that we can give you a shout. So please find the chat. Select all panelists and attendees if you are able, and let us know what organization you're calling in from. So welcome to First Liberty Bank in Oklahoma City. Welcome to State Farm Insurance, more State Farm. Welcome from the U.S. Department of Treasury and Leidos, I think I see. Looking for those international callers as well. Welcome to Planned Parenthood of North Central States and Ladd Lake in Dousman, Wisconsin. More people at State Farm, apparently. They love you, Rich Brandt. So a few more considerations as we begin today. We are recording today's session. So in the event that you have colleagues or friends or collaborators or family members who could benefit from this content on the topic of resilience, you will be able to share the recording and also the slides today that we'll be sending out via PDF. So good news to everyone who wants to watch this later or to get a hold of these slides for continued learning. Welcome to Mario at the Federal Institute of Telecommunications in Mexico, and welcome in Germany. Again, if you do want to share today's event, we are broadcasting on Facebook on the Weaving Influence page, and you can instantly share this to help us reach more folks with this content. If you want to hop over to Facebook and go ahead and share this recording as it's happening, then people around the world can join with you. So Amy, welcome, friends of the Chicago River, and Michelle at LEA Global. Glad to have all of you with us, and Adam from RDR Group, welcome to you too. So as we get started with today's content, what we want to do is launch a few polls to get your feedback on the topic of resilience. So I'm going to launch 3 polls in a row. We're looking for your feedback, and then as we start into the topic, we'll take a look at the results together. So we are so excited to have you engage with us today on these topics. So here we go with the first poll. How would you rate the level of change, pressure, and unpredictability at your place of work? Is it high, medium, or low? This is an interesting one. And I think, you know, especially at this time of year, I'm curious about, and please tell us in the chat, is this time of year a time that you experience more of this unpredictability and change and pressure? What do you think, Rich?
Yeah, I think it certainly adds to the chaos, the things that you're trying to plan outside of work.
And I think inside work too. I'm going to give just a couple more seconds on this one. About 60% of you have replied, and then we're going to launch another poll. I can't wait to see what it is.
I'm interested in these results too.
We're not going to give a sneak preview though, correct?
No, I'm going to wait to show those.
Okay. All right. Okay, let's take a look at poll number 2. How well do you think the average worker handles the chaos at work? We have 3 choices. They keep their cool. They're just hanging in there. They get overwhelmed. So the poll should show up. If you have your Zoom in full screen, you should be able to see the poll. And apologies if you can't, feel free to type type into the chat. It's possible that the polls don't work in Zoom from the web browser. That is highly possible, but we would welcome your feedback in the chat. And please select all panelists and attendees so everyone can see your answers if you're willing to share. It looks like just about 62% of you have voted on this one. So I'll give you a few more seconds. Some folks are having an easy time and some folks are not in finding the polls. So how well do you think the average worker handles the chaos at work? The first choice is they keep their cool. The second choice is they're just hanging in there. And the third choice is they get overwhelmed. I'm going to end the polling on that one. And we have one more before we dive into today's content. This is about you. So how well do you think you handle the chaos at work? One choice is I keep my cool. Another choice is I'm just hanging in there. And the third choice is I get overwhelmed. So these results are interesting. I cannot wait to share them. Oh, Erica, I'm so envious. You work from home and you're totally cool with chaos because there isn't any. Amazing. Oh, here's an interesting comment. When I do manage to keep my cool, the chaos comes out later, not usually at work. All right, we're going to go ahead and close up the polling. And thanks to those of you who are posting your comments. Okay, so we are going to dive into today's topic, but before we do that, I do want to take a moment to introduce Rich Brandt. I'm curious if you knew Rich before today. Go ahead and write yes in the chat, and if you didn't, you can write no. Rich is a dad and a granddad and a trainer. He's been a trainer with RDR Group for over 20 years and really has some amazing insights to share on this topic, so I can't wait for us to dive in. And if you think this is your second webinar with Rich, actually we had the first webinar with Rich's younger brother, younger by 10 minutes, Ralph. He looks exactly like Rich. We recently had a webinar with Ralph on the topic of diversity and inclusion. So thanks to all of you who are sharing. And why don't we go ahead and dive in, Rich? So resilience is such a popular topic, you know, based on the number of people we had who signed up for today's event and the number of people who have shown up for this event. It's a popular topic with our audiences, and it's a buzzword in the workplace the past 10 years or so. And so why is this such a big deal? And let's talk about what exactly resilience is.
Well, resilience is a psychological attribute that they've used to describe people who have the ability to adapt quickly to adverse change. And my understanding is that the research began with children, sometimes children of alcoholics, sometimes children who went through war, and some of the children possess this ability to just kind of bounce back from whatever trauma they experienced and kind of go on with their life as normal. I think they were described as invincible. But most obviously suffered trauma that lasted for a long, long time. And I think the relevance for most of us at work is that we all have unexpected, unpredictable changes that occur, days that are very chaotic, and most people get overwhelmed or tipped over. It stops their forward momentum. It could be debilitating. And there is a minority of people who seem to be able to handle the same kind of crises and challenges with grace, equanimity, and poise. And that's what we want to talk about today. How can you learn to be the kind of person who goes with the flow and doesn't allow the stress to get to you and can, you know, maneuver and navigate around the obstacles more easily? And so now I'd like to see the results of the polls. Let's take a look at the first one if we could.
Yes, let's take a look. So it looks to me like 61% of the people on today's call
That's what I expected.
said that the level,
the majority, the majority would say it's a pretty high pressure environment where they work. The 5% that say it's low, I'm assuming they're actuaries maybe, or work in the back room of a pharmacy. I'm just joking. But now let's ask the question about how it affects the people that you work with in terms of their stress levels based on the perception of our participants.
Sure. Here we go. Let's take a look at that one.
Okay, so about almost 40% say people get overwhelmed, and about 60% say hanging in there, and the smallest minority, only 3%, keep their cool. Now, the next question was really a trick question because I wanted to see how honest people could be about themselves, because most of us are saying, 3% say, the people say 3% can keep their cool. I want to see if it's different in terms of how they look at themselves. That's what I thought. 39% say they keep their cool. So this is what psychologists call self-serving bias. We tend to be skewed in terms of how we see ourselves and how others see us. So we might think, well, we do pretty good handling the stress. It's my coworkers who are really challenged. And I hope as we kind of get into this, all of us can be a little more honest in terms of how changes affect us personally. Thank you, though, for participating in those polls.
Really interesting. So, Rich, could you give us a quick overview of the kind of qualities we need to develop if we want to be more resilient and better able to handle chaos in the workplace?
Sure. I've been studying this topic for well over 20 years and have read numerous books on the subject. And I've tried to bring together what I consider to be the most salient characteristics of a resilient person that we can learn. First and foremost is ownership. And that's what psychologists call having an internal locus of control, which means when we think about what's controlling the outcome of events in our life, it's being able to recognize it has to do more with us and how we respond to those events rather than an external locus of control, which says, what's really controlling the chaos of my life are these circumstances and these people around me. Being able to take ownership and, to just kind of take charge of the circumstances is step number one. The second is emotional regulation, which is a big one. Being able to find the off switch to that fight or flight response, that amygdala that kind of turns on when we have unexpected change. So being able to keep calm in a crisis. And a lot of that involves learning not to ruminate or dwell on certain thoughts. And we'll get to that a little bit later. The third is optimism, having this unyielding faith that somehow, in spite of the circumstances you're going through, that you'll be able to conquer them and overcome them, and things will turn out okay in the end. And then the last one is learning to rely on others, to have moral support from other people in your life.
Wow, that's super powerful. So can you maybe give us an example, a story of someone who displays these characteristics of resilience so we can figure out how this looks in real life?
Yeah, and I thought I would try and pick a work life example, someone who had a hard day at work. So this is the one I came up with. Talk about a challenging day in the office. I'm sure everybody on the call remembers this. It was January 15th, 2009. U.S. Airways Flight 1549, what we've come to refer to as the Miracle on the Hudson. And Chesley Sullenberger, who we now know is nicknamed Sully, it's an average takeoff, and about 90 seconds into the ascent at about 9,000 feet, a flock of birds knock out both turbojets simultaneously. So he's without power, descending rapidly on New York City. And he has to decide in a very short time frame what to do. And fortunately, shortly after the event, he was interviewed by Katie Couric. And these are some of the words that he used to describe his thought process. And it parallels these four characteristics. He said the first thing he did was to follow the protocol of transfer of control. He grabbed the side stick and announced to everyone, "My aircraft." In other words, now they were going manually, and it was effectively a glider. It was up to him. He took ownership. Second, he said his initial reaction, he said it was the worst sickening falling through the floor, pit of the stomach feeling you could imagine. The physiological reaction was strong, and I realized I had to force calm on the situation. So he's describing that fight or flight response, and he had it within himself to find out how to deactivate that, to turn that off. And that's a big part of what we're going to discuss today. How do you learn to calm yourself down in the midst of an unexpected event? And then the third thing he said, there were all these variables he had to manage. And Katie Couric said something like, yeah, there was still a big if. And he looked at the camera and just said without hubris, I was sure I could do it. And I'll tell you, the confidence that he exudes, that they have a reunion video that I've seen, and just everyone that was part of that experience just thought he was a hero. And to him, he was just doing his job, but he knew he was able to handle this situation. Never did he think that they were going to die that day. He kind of knew that somehow he was prepared for that moment. And finally, the supportive relationships. He said that it really comforted him to hear through the cockpit door the crew yelling instructions, heads down, stay down, brace for impact. He knew that if he could land the plane, that the crew was capable of doing their part and getting the passengers out safely. And that sense of bonding with the team helped him in being able to stay focused on his part of the task.
Wow, so there's a lot of comments in the chat, just people thinking about how amazing it is that Sully was able to respond with so much resilience. And I'm wondering, Rich, if we can talk next about these 4 characteristics and how we can incorporate them or cultivate them in our own lives.
Yeah, that's what I really am excited about, is trying to share with everyone kind of the secrets to being able to make this a part of your life. So the first issue is this ownership, an internal locus of control. And maybe the best way to understand an internal locus of control is to think of the opposite. An external locus of control is when things go wrong in our life and we start blaming everybody else. So if you verbalize or even think, my boss just drives me crazy, or my coworkers, really get on my nerves, or this job stresses me out, or these deadlines are really getting to me, all those things would be characteristic of an external locus of control. Because an internal locus of control, instead of blaming others, tends to say, what can I do about it? It's up to me in terms of how I take charge of this particular situation. So my stress is really self-controlled, and that's a major first step. And I've got another poll that I asked if we could kind of launch, because I'm curious how people view themselves in terms of the stress or anger or depression that they feel, especially at work.
Sure. What do you see as the main cause of your stress, anger, or depression? Reading this in case you can't see the poll. Other people, heavy workload, challenging circumstances, my busy schedule, all of the above, or none of the above. And I did hear in the chat from someone who's having some audio echoing. And what I would recommend is that you try turning down the volume on your computer. That may help with that. I'm not hearing the echo, but I hope that you can get it resolved. So what do you see as the main cause of your stress, anger, or depression? Other people, heavy workload, challenging circumstances, busy schedule, all of the above, or none of the above? And a couple of people are typing in who can't see, other people, and my own thoughts. We'll give you a few more seconds. So only about 53% of people have taken the poll. A few comments. Are we going to show these results soon?
Yeah, we can show them as soon as they're ready.
Okay, super. Looks like just a few more seconds. We're going to give you 5 seconds.
Sure. This is so nice for me to be able to get these polls, especially with the large group of people.
Yes, so here we go. Can you see the results?
Yes, yes.
So for those who can't see the results, we have about 36% of people saying all of the above is the main cause of stress, anger, or depression.
Wow.
8% say none of the above.
Yeah.
And it looks like of the individual items, challenging circumstances and other people are tied at 19% of each.
Well, this was a trick question too, and I guess I'm giving myself away where I do this a lot, because the real answer for people who have an internal locus of control is none of the above. It's not about circumstances. It's not about workload. It's not about other people. And when you read to me what somebody said in the chat, they said my own thoughts. That's the right answer. It really, being able to be resilient, you have to get to the point where you stop blaming what's going on outside of yourself and realize it's really more how you're interpreting things. I always tell people a traffic jam on the way to work doesn't stress you out. It's when you tell yourself, I'm going to be late. It's the third time this month. I'll get fired. I'll be homeless. Now you're stressed out, but it's not because the traffic. It's because of how you choose to think about it. And I know this is hard for some people because, they think, well, if you had my boss, or, if you know what my job was like. But the truth is there are people who have highly stressful jobs, which is why I used Sully as the example, who are able to maintain that poise and equanimity. And, he could have said, just my luck, I should have been a dentist. I don't know why I wanted to be a pilot, but instead he just said, my aircraft took control, focused on what he needed to do. I want to introduce you to what we affectionately refer to at RDR Group as the victimeter. Now, we made that up, but the research behind it is valid, that about 20% of the population have a victim mentality. So they do blame, they do complain a lot. They think that what's going wrong with their life is circumstantial. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. You can convince yourself that you're powerless because everything that's making your life difficult in your mind is something that you have no control over, which really renders you a victim. And most people, if they're honest, I think are in the middle, what we call the survivor mentality. These are the people who just kind of suck it up, grin and bear it, grit their teeth, push on. And if you ask someone in this category, how you doing? They usually say, hanging in there, or getting by, fair to Midland, whatever that means. How's the job? Pays the bills. How the kids? 4 more years, I'll be out of here. People are thinking like that or talking like that. They don't really feel like they can influence their life that much either, but they're proud of the fact that they're struggling through. But resilient people are thrivers. They take ownership. They realize it's up to them. They don't wait for things to happen. They make things happen. They don't place blame. They just take responsibility. It's what can I do about it now? And I have another poll I'd like to just ask people, if you kind of understand these different categories, I'm curious how people see themselves in terms of this victimeter.
Sure. So for people who can't see the poll, it says, which of these 3 mentalities on the victimeter represent your most common mindset when you face setbacks and adversity? Victim, survivor, or thriver? And in the event that you can't see the polls, please feel free to type your answer in the chat. So thanks for all the comments. Alicia says this is giving her some perspective on a colleague who drives her nuts. She's always late, doesn't communicate proactively, but by the time she makes it to scheduled events, usually very late, she isn't even apologetic. Could it be that she actually has a good locus of control?
Yeah. Well, the good news is we're recording this, so maybe we can give you a link and you can send it to her.
Indeed. And thanks for all the comments. It looks like we have about 55% of people who have answered this poll, so I'll give it a few more moments.
Okay.
Jay says that life would be boring, too boring, without some challenges and a healthy level of stress.
Yeah, that's true. No, challenges are great. And that's part of being resilient, is learning to let those challenges help you grow and develop. They actually call it post-traumatic growth, which is just the opposite of post-traumatic stress. Okay.
So here's what we have.
Yeah. And kind of expected this too, because of, again, how we skew things in reference to ourselves. What's interesting is that most people, it kind of averages out almost 60%, which is what the studies research shows have that survivor mentality. But what's interesting is only 3% feel that they have that victim mentality. And thanks for the honesty of being able to say so. But much larger number think that they're thrivers, which is great. And I hope that that's true. It's just that it's a lot easier to see a victim mentality in someone else than it is to see it in ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. So I can see how taking ownership is really a huge step. And I know, I'll admit, I'm examining myself as we go through these qualities. So if we are able to get past blaming our circumstances, for harming our happiness or causing us stress, what's the next step after that?
Well, this is a big one. Being able to regulate your emotions, your thoughts and emotions. And to me, this is really key. It requires discipline, almost like working out at the gym. or I know you're a runner, Becky. I'm sure you don't try a marathon without practicing ahead of time. And so there's no way to be able to know how to keep yourself calm unless it becomes a regular discipline in your life. And there are two components to this. One is learning not to ruminate. In other words, not allowing your mind to stray to the past and kind of dwell on something that happened, or to race ahead to the future where you're worried about things, being able to kind of stay in the present. And the second part is being able to find this off switch to the amygdala, staying calm. And so with that, I'd like to introduce a thought to you that I think is pretty interesting to think about, because I think most people have a misconception. We have two brains inside of our head, not one, as weird as that sounds. The research suggests we have an emotional brain, which is housed in the little almond-shaped area called the amygdala, and then we have a rational brain in the prefrontal cortex. And those brains talk to each other. So there are neurological connectors called dendrites, and they're communicating with each other all the time. And some people, the rational brain tends to have the upper hand. So when something happens and they want to freak out, they know how to quiet the amygdala. And other people, just the opposite. Something happens and their rational brain says, well, calm down, but the amygdala just hijacks the rational brain and they just kind of go off. And this is what the experts are talking about when they talk about emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, as I understand it, was pioneered by two psychologists at Yale, Peter Salovey and John Mayer, not the guitar player. Peter Salovey is now the president of Yale. And they realized that the way we normally measure intelligence in the Western world, especially here in the United States, is around IQ and GPA. And their studies indicated that those are really not good determinants in terms of your success or happiness in life. In fact, they say it's about 20%. What's more important, much more important, is emotional intelligence, which is two things. First, being able to manage your thoughts and emotions. The second part, which we won't get into today, has to do with being able to manage relationships, having empathy for others. But this ability to find the off switch to the amygdala is what indicates you have high emotional intelligence. And the really good news is that's something that can be developed. And that's what I'd like to address now, is I would like to, do I have a question here? Because I can't see it. Do I have a question for a poll here or no?
Let me check.
I think it's.
We have one on ruminate. Ruminate right, is next.
Let me describe ruminate, and then I'll ask you to take a poll. Rumination is actually a biological term for certain animals that chew their cud, like a goat or a cow. And I know this is gross, but apparently cows, because they don't have the proper enzymes to digest or break down simple carbohydrates, they chew and swallow, regurgitate, chew some more, swallow, regurgitate, and it takes them all day long to pass that grass through 3 stomachs and get the nutrition it needs. So psychologists thought, what an appropriate term to describe how some people just get stuck on certain negative thoughts and they dwell on them over and over again. And again, not to be crude, but they just regurgitate these thoughts over and over again. And it turns out there are 2 things that people are good at ruminating on. One is the past. Something happened. Somebody said something in a meeting that was insulting and you can't let it go. And it's, the rest of the day you're thinking about it. You're driving home and it's just burning you up, and you go to sleep and you're still thinking about it. And all the time that you're ruminating, it's causing the amygdala to be triggered, which produces cortisol, the stress hormone, which is really toxic. Other people ruminate about the future. So it's, they can't stop thinking about the performance review next week or the deadline that's coming up. And again, more cortisol production. When you don't ruminate and you stay in the present, you don't have all that toxic chemical in your brain that's causing you to not be able to focus. And also cortisol makes you more depressed as well. So here's a few tips on not ruminating. One is simply snap out of it. One of my favorite authors in the field of positive psychology is a guy named Dr. Martin Seligman. And he wrote a book called Learn to Optimism, which I highly recommend. But he said, I don't know if it was originated with him or he picked it up from somebody else, but just keep a rubber band around your wrist. And the next time you find yourself drifting off into something that happened in the past or worried about something in the future, you snap that rubber band. And it's going to sting, but the idea is to send the signal to your brain to kind of rewire your brain. The brain has this wonderful attribute called neuroplasticity. You can rewire your brain, and that's why it's so important to kind of get in the discipline or habit of not ruminating on things. Another strategy is, if you're a seasoned ruminator and you know who you are, try scheduling a little time to ruminate instead of letting it ruin your whole day. In other words, just say, on the drive home, I'll give myself 30 minutes to worry myself sick about whatever it is that I'm concerned about in the future, or to, obsess over what somebody said at a meeting, but then let it go so you don't have the cortisol pumping through your veins all day long. Thirdly, laughter can be a great release for any negative habit that we have, because it releases endorphins, which are feel-good chemicals that counteract the cortisol. So if you catch yourself ruminating, just learn to laugh at, there I go again, I just can't seem to help it, and just have a good laugh, and then try to get back to life as normal. But the most important and constructive thing you can do is obviously just take action. If somebody said something, what can I do about it? Let's go talk to them. If you're worried about your finances, make an appointment to go see a financial counselor. But taking action is a much more constructive way than just spinning your wheels and ruminating. I think most people can relate to this, but I'd like them to take the poll to find out, just how common this is among our participants, this habit of brooding over things or worrying about the future.
So for those of you who can't see the poll, it says, how frequently do you ruminate, brood over a past flight, or worry about a future concern? Obsessively, regularly, occasionally, or rarely? And I want to ask another question too that will have to be answered in the chat. I'm curious how many people get stuck in the past and how many people are worrying about the future. And
Yes.
I wonder if there's any studies that address that issue.
And how many people do both? Like some people, they have kind of the double whammy where they seem to do both.
Yeah, I see that some do both.
People really relate to this. I think we have a lot of ruminators in the world, but I'm curious, see what we come up with results here.
I'm going to show them in a moment. I do have one person who's commenting that saying just snap out of it is offensive. It's not that easy.
Oh, well, yeah, and that wasn't my idea. That's why I referenced Martin Seligman, who's a luminary in psychology. I probably did a poor job of describing it a little too briefly. It's the matter of awareness. It doesn't mean that you can simply, that easily get over rumination, but it's to bring awareness to it, because a lot of people drift off into rumination and they're not even cognizant that they're doing it. They can be doing it while they're driving. They can be doing it while they're in the shower. So the idea of the rubber band is to bring awareness to it. We're going to give you some more strategies in the next slide in terms of how to maybe do a better job over time of learning to get over the habit of rumination. But I agree, it's not easy to break a habit.
So much in the comments. So let's take a look at these results together.
Okay.
It looks like 43% for those who can't see the poll say you occasionally ruminate, 41% regularly ruminate, 7% obsessively ruminate, and only 9% rarely ruminate.
Okay, so about 91% say rumination is a part of your life, and I'm sure that most of you would love to get to the 9% that say rarely. And I think that our next slide will provide a little bit of help in terms of how to stay in the present and not get fixated with the past and the future.
Sure. Really quickly, Rich, before we go there, a bunch of people are asking about the book, and some people have put it into the chat. It's Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman, and we can put that in our follow-up email as well.
Yes. He's such a forward thinker in the whole field of what they call positive psychology. And this book was really instrumental in helping me understand things. And it's still, I think, very practical, even though it's maybe a couple decades old. I think it was published in '95, but very practical. And for people in your life who you kind of see as having more of a victim mentality, you might want to anonymously give them out at the holidays.
What a great idea. All right.
So to me, emotional regulation are these two things, not ruminating and being able to stay calm. And what we're talking about here is some form of meditation. Now, a lot of people get wigged out about meditation because in their mind, they picture having to get in a lotus position and chanting a mantra and maybe a statue of the Buddha. And that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a medical, scientific approach to just finding some calm in your life, taking, ideally 10 minutes a day to just find the off switch to the amygdala, like building a muscle. And here's a few tips in terms of how to do that. Choose a realistic time frame. For those of you who aren't meditators, in fact, I think I got a poll question to ask how many do meditate. So I guess I should ask that first before we go to the particular tips for meditation.
Sure. How often do you meditate for 5 to 10 minutes? And while folks are answering, I want to share an example. So I have a newer client to my company, Rich, and whenever I meet with her for a call, she requests that we do a 1-minute meditation.
That's great.
And she sets a timer and she has 3 words. She says, first you have to receive whatever you were doing in a busy way before you got on the call. And then you need to take, oh shoot, I'm going to get it wrong. There's 2 more R's, like refresh and renew, but she literally sets a timer for 1 minute to give everybody on the call space to refresh before.
That's great. Do you find it to be beneficial to do that?
Yes, I liked it. We should do it on our calls. We'll try it next time. Although the last time I tried it, something happened in the middle, like the phone rang or I got distracted. So
that usually happens when you try to meditate too. Something interrupts you.
Someone's saying they would hate that practice at the beginning of a meeting. Well, I could see how, if you're not used to it and someone recommends it, it could be a little bit off-putting.
For most people, it's very foreign, and trying to meditate for people who have the kind of mind that's always thinking, one thing after another, and you can't shut it off. And that's, I think, a large portion of the workplace. Trying to be able to sit in stillness for 5 or 10 minutes is really a challenge for them. It's uncomfortable. And I always tell people, if it's uncomfortable, then you're probably the person that needs it the most. Meditation came easy for me. I really, my wife introduced it to me about 10 years ago, and it really changed her life dramatically. I've always been pretty low stress, but meditation comes pretty easy for me because I have, generally speaking, a fairly quiet mind. But for people who have a busy mind, it's difficult. So do we have the results yet?
We do. I'm sorry. I'm watching the chat because there's so much interesting going on in the chat.
Great. I wish we had a chance to respond to all the questions in the chat.
So here are the responses.
Okay.
And just really quickly, Tracy is it Tracy? No, Melissa is asking for the 3 R's in the follow-up email. I do have those in my notebook. And so we can certainly send out those 3 R's for the beginning of a meeting in the email. Okay. So here are the results. How often do you meditate for 5 to 10 minutes? 23% of people say almost daily. 14% say 2 to 3 times per week for those who can't see it. 6% weekly, 30% hardly ever, and 27% never. So at least more than half of us might be able to benefit by implementing some of your suggestions.
Well, that surprises me because I've seen statistics that suggest that only 8% of Americans meditate regularly. Perhaps the caliber of the people who sign up for your webinars, and I mean this sincerely, are probably a little bit more into self-improvement, so they're not unused to meditation. But like you said, it seems like well over 50%, it's not a regular practice. So let me give you a few tips. If you're not a regular meditator, a realistic time frame for you is probably 3 to 5 minutes. It'll seem interminable, especially the first few times you do it. But again, I would encourage you to stick with it because it probably indicates the need. And then what you're going to do is just focus on your breath. That's what's happening in the present moment, is just one breath at a time. Your thoughts are going to stray. You're going to think, oh my gosh, did I make lunch for the kids tomorrow? I got to do that. And as soon as you notice your thoughts, bring yourself back to your breath. Just keep, focusing on your in-breath and out-breath. And then after a while, being able to do so for 10 minutes is not so challenging. And that's kind of the sweet spot. For those who might need to be convinced, it can lower your blood pressure, lower your blood sugar, it can grow your gray matter. It just has multiple medical benefits. And then doing a body scan is when you just to stay in the present moment. Just notice the tension in your neck and relax. Notice the tension in your shoulders and relax. But being able to get in this discipline of some form of meditation, if not daily, at least a few times a week, you're going to build the muscle that's going to allow you to turn off the amygdala when you need it. So when you're in a meeting and someone says something, it's like your grandmother probably told you, count to 10, take a breath. It's a mini meditation, and you're able to kind of get back in the rational brain instead of losing it or getting all stressed out.
So, and thanks to many of you who are sharing your thoughts about meditation in the chat. So I think we're going to look at the next part of this related to optimism. And what would you say to someone, Rich, who would say to you, well, I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. Why should I pretend everything is great when it's not?
Yes, that's a really good question. When people hear the word optimism, they think of someone who's whistling in the dark. I remember hearing one time someone said an optimist is like a guy falling off a 20-story building, and while he's passing the 10th floor, he's telling himself, well, I'm okay so far. That's not what we mean by optimism. What we mean by optimism is expecting through these difficult challenges. You can be realistic about what you're going through, but can you see, do you have hopefulness that you'll be able to rise above these challenges, to overcome them, that you have it within you to be able to cope sufficiently with what you're facing? So it's not about denying what's going on. You know, Sully didn't say, oh, let's ignore this. You know, I think I'll have another drink of my water. He knew immediately it was a crisis, but he had to have that sense that I've got this, I can handle this. That's what we mean by optimism, because this sense of optimism or pessimism, it turns out, becomes a frame through which we see the world. In other words, we can, it's such a habit, such an ingrained habit that it alters what we see. So pessimists and optimists can be in the same situation and they're seeing different things. The pessimist sees all the things that could go wrong, and the optimist sees the possibilities. At Harvard Medical School, they did an experiment that they now call the Tetris effect. And they had volunteer students play Tetris, the video game, for 72 hours nonstop. I think they were able to take a break for a short nap and going to the bathroom and snacks and that sort of thing. Otherwise, 72 hours of playing this video game. On day 4, when they contacted the participants, they said, stay close to your phone, we'll give you a call during the day. They couldn't get it out of their head. So if they were in a grocery store, they were playing Tetris with the cereal boxes as they walked down the aisle. If they were outside in a major city, the buildings became giant Tetris blocks. If they just woke up, they were dreaming about blocks falling out of the sky. And so this idea is that, I think the technical term is cognitive afterimage. We can't get certain things out of our head once we kind of reinforce it long enough. Optimism and pessimism works exactly the same way. So you can put a pessimist and an optimist in the same situation, and they're actually seeing different things. But I think I have a poll here to just kind of ask people how they think about themselves in reference to these different outlooks.
We sure do. So what percentage of people that you know are predominantly optimists is the question? 10%, 20%, 35%, 50%, or 65%? I'm wondering what the trick with this question is, Rich. Maybe there's no trick.
Everyone's going to be expecting a trick with every question. They're not all trick questions.
Oh, someone said 5% actually in the chat.
Wow.
5% of the people.
Yeah.
She knows. 20% at work, and maybe she needs to change her workplace. Also, you mentioned the university with this Tetris study. Would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, that was done at Harvard Medical School, and I think Sean Aker wrote a book. I think it's called The Happiness Factor, The Happiness Advantage, and he references that study in the book.
Got it. Okay. All right, so I'm going to close up the polling in just a second. Jay says the engagement data in the US is about 30%, and he thinks it might follow that.
Yeah.
We have one person who's saying the only person she can think of who is truly an optimist is her partner.
Wow.
Only, yeah, unknown, but would guess a smaller number than it should be. So let's
You know,
take a look at
people
these
can, if you
results.
ask people to think of someone they know who's a pessimist, you can think of like 10 people,
Hmm.
and certain people stand out real strongly.
So Sean
Okay.
Acor's book is called Happiness or Happy Advantage, according to our
Okay.
friend
Thank you.
Chantal. Yes. We have such a helpful group. Happiness Advantage, right? That's what I thought. I think I have a copy of it. Okay, so of the people who answered the poll, 10% think that the percentage of people that they know who are predominantly optimists, 10% of them. 27% of you said 20%. 28% of you said 35%. That's the majority. And 22% said 50%, like half the people are optimists, and 12% said 65%.
Okay. Yeah,
That's a lot of percents. I don't know if that made any sense.
well, it looks like 70% feel like the optimist in their life is the minority. In other words, somewhere between 10 and 35% of the people they know are optimists. And that's 70% say it's the minority. It looks like 22% say it's 50-50. And 12% feel like most of the people they know are optimists. That's wonderful because I think, I think most of us feel that we're surrounded by a lot of pessimistic people. And maybe it'll help to kind of explain in a little more in depth what we mean by optimism or pessimism by this next slide. Again, we're talking about how central it is to be an optimist if you want to be resilient. And these are the main differences between an optimist or a pessimist. Now, I call it a skeptical lens for a pessimist and an expectant lens because I want to try and steer away from that language of an optimist being someone who thinks everything's wonderful. An expectant lens means you can see the potential opportunities in a situation versus just seeing the potential detriments. And I'll try to do this quick because I know we're running out of time. But here's a really interesting fact that I think everyone should try and remember for the rest of their life. The average person talks to themselves 50,000 times a day. Just think about that. So from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed, there's this constant conversation that's going on in your head. And most of that time, we're explaining things, we're interpreting things, we're giving meaning to things, the traffic that stops, the notice we got in an email, that look from a coworker. And so from an early age, we develop what they call an explanatory style. And as you probably guessed where I'm going with this, some people have a pessimistic explanatory style. They predominantly look at things and explain things in a more negative fashion. And other people have a more optimistic style. And the main difference is, first, how they explain the origin of the problem. Is it personal? Is it me? Something wrong with me? Am I somehow deficient? Am I flawed? If you personalize things, you're going to be more pessimistic because you're giving away your control. A person with an expectant lens, they look at the context or circumstances to say, there's nothing wrong with me. I did something wrong, but I can do it differently next time. What do I need to do different? So the main question for a pessimist is, why me? Why do these things always happen to me? An optimist says, what can I do about it? The second difference is the extent of the problem. Pessimists make a big deal out of nothing sometimes, or they make things worse than they really are, where the optimist tends to compartmentalize. Again, think solely. It's a glider. I just need to make sure the wings are level, the nose is slightly up, and we're coming in at the right speed, but I've got this. Can you somehow minimize what's going on and make it manageable? And the last issue is the duration of the problem. Is this final, permanent, where I'll never change, things will never get better, these things always happen? Or do you talk to yourself in a way where things are temporary? I'll get through this, tomorrow's another day. So that conversation in your head is really what controls the optimism or pessimism. And one of the things that I try to teach people to do, we don't have enough time today, is to learn how to reframe things. And what I mean by that is if we can take a step back, take a breath, and look at things from a different angle, a lot of times we can kind of get out of that fight or flight mode that again is activated when we're pessimistic. And I use this optical illusion because these tables are exactly the same size. It's the way they're framed that kind of fools you. If you take away the legs and then kind of spin it so they're facing the same angle, you can see they're exactly the same. And probably most people have had a situation where if they do, maybe they're thinking about something more pessimistically, but if they take a breath, think about it, all of a sudden, okay, it's not as bad as I thought.
So, Rich, we do have a poll asking folks about what their predominant outlook is. The first poll was asking, how they see others. Do we want to go ahead and launch that
No,
one?
I'm going to pass on that just so we can finish the last item. The last characteristic is I want to get to before we finish our time together.
Okay, got it. Just checking in.
Yeah, thank
So,
you.
you know, we've been talking about how regulating your thoughts and emotions can affect our frame of mind. And so I think that we want to cover one more item, which is relationships. And a few people have been making comments throughout that what impacts them is those supportive relationships. So let's be sure to talk about that.
Yes. Well, actually, it turns out that this is really central to resilient people, is they know how to lean on other people. And it really boils down to a few things. If you find someone you can trust, that you can kind of open up with and share your feelings and your ideas, it's a great release for cortisol. It lowers your stress. I think we all can relate to that. Secondly, if you find someone who can meet your emotional needs and expectations, it produces positive neurochemicals like oxytocin and serotonin that bring well-being. Relationships obviously can help us to continually grow and get better if we're open to other people's ideas. And finally, the reciprocity, that give and take, can help us find balance. And that's where I want to kind of end the day, is talk about how, if we think about the complementary nature of personality differences, how each one of us, because of our personality type, have inherent deficiencies or limitations or blind spots, then you can see how being able to have relationships with other people who can give you insight and feedback and perspective can really help you be more well-rounded to deal with life's challenges. And I just want to go through this quickly. These are the 4 temperaments according to Myers-Briggs. An SJ, they're the practical, organized types. They are often labeled guardians because they like to, provide, protect, keep the rules. They have great logistical skills, so they're good at planning the party, running the party. They value security procedure. They respect authority. They like responsibility. And their big thing is they want everything to be orderly and stable. They're good at minding the store. The opposite would be the SP, and those are kind of the in-the-moment spontaneous types. I call them improvisers. Actually, Myers-Briggs and others call them artisans. But the point is, they're good tacticians. In a crisis, without a plan, they can figure it out. This is MacGyver, like paperclip, stick of gum, will diffuse the bomb. They can think on the spot. They value creativity. They're the essence of adaptability and flexibility. They like stimulation and adventure and risk. And they like to act on impulse. And their motto is just do it. The NFs are the intuitive feelers. They're the ones who are the visionary, compassionate types, idealists. They have good diplomatic skills. It's all about people. They want to find meaning in things, harmony with everyone. They're peace and love hippies who are still waiting for the age of Aquarius, and they see the best in everyone. And then the NTs, the exact opposite, who are more the innovative, logical types, who everything is about logic and knowledge and reason, and they like to analyze things and problem solve, and they need independence, objectivity, and to think outside the box. But if we can recognize how different these different quadrants are, and by the way, I married a complete opposite. When we took the Myers-Briggs, I'm an INFP. My wife came out as an ESTJ. And I remember somebody once said, if you marry someone who's exactly like you are, one of you aren't necessary. I've always appreciated the complementary nature of personality types, because no one has probably challenged me or changed me more than my wife. I think she'd probably say the same, where we kind of brought each other to the middle. Because left to ourselves, we tend to have a downside. So the SJs can be bossy and controlling. The improvisers can be a little irresponsible and a little reckless at times. The idealists can be the pushovers or the doormats. And the rationals can sometimes come across as a little arrogant and condescending. So we really need each other to find balance. And I think this is a really important part of being resilient, is to allow other people to challenge and change us. So in a nutshell, those are the 4 characteristics: taking ownership, take charge, regulate your emotions and stay calm, be optimistic about the outcome, and find other people you can lean on. I wanted to end with this, though. I saw this meme the other day, thought it was so appropriate. This is why you need to be resilient. This is what we think in terms of new ventures that we're involved in, and this is reality. It's going to involve ups and downs, and you need to be resilient in order to persist through all those.
Wow, we have covered so much ground today, and I'm personally finding myself challenged. Even though you and I previewed this content together, was such a valuable and rich hour. We don't have a ton of time for questions, but I would welcome a few. We might have time for one or two. So here's a question from Len. He's wondering, what about people who take action? Where does taking action come into resilience? Hopefully,
Yeah.
Len, I'm interpreting your question well.
Yeah, that's great. I think that, part of it is the ownership piece. You're not waiting for someone to, come along and rescue you. You're not waiting to win the lotto. It's just like, here's my situation, my aircraft, what am I going to do about it now? But yeah, that I think that is a big part of being resilient is you're not passive, you're active. Good point.
Sure, thanks. And thanks for all the kind comments in the chat. We're always so thrilled that folks choose to invest their time with us. I want to share a few follow-up items if you're interested in finding out more about Rich and RDR Group and the work that they do. I think we have a slide about that. Yes, Rich?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot it was up to me.
All right, so there are a few ways that you can keep in touch. It looks like Rich has given us his phone number and his email address. The website is rdrgroup.com. And some possible next steps with you would be to schedule a free resilience pilot session. So if you're in an organization who's interested in bringing RDR Group in, they actually have some arrangements around pilot sessions. And if you email or call Rich, you can find out more about that. You could also have a consultation or call with Rich. Rich would love to have you connect with him on LinkedIn, and you can sign up to hear from RDR Group. We also have an upcoming webinar in January. We're going to have Ralph again, the younger brother, and then another webinar with Rich next year as well as we continue our series with RDR Group. And so we would welcome you to go ahead and sign up for any of those. We will be sending out a follow-up email that will include a PDF of today's slides for your further learning, a recording if you'd like to dig in more. And we're so thrilled that you were with us. Rich, any parting wisdom as we wrap up the hour together?
Well, I don't know about the wisdom. I just want to say thank you for taking the whole hour, all of you who participated on a very, very relevant and significant topic. I hope that you'll stay in touch and you can educate me. I hope this has been educational for everyone.
Thanks so much, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
Becky.